"Excuse me, young lady," Claudia, the flight attendant, said, her tone firm but polite. "First class is reserved for paying passengers." Zara, the young black girl, blinked, momentarily stunned. She looked down at her boarding pass, then back at Claudia. "I am a first-class passenger," she replied, her voice steady but soft. "Here's my ticket. There must have been a mistake." "You don't belong here in first class," Claudia said, her voice laced with doubt. "If you don't comply, I'll have to escalate this and call security." Little did she know, the very girl she had just humiliated was the daughter of the airline's owner, and she was about to expose Claudia's long-standing prejudice. As we delve into this story, tell us where you're watching from in the comments. And if you believe that everyone should be treated fairly, without prejudice, no matter who they are, click the subscribe button. The airport was alive with the hum of activity. Travelers moved briskly, suitcases rolling across polished floors. Announcements echoed over the intercom, hurried footsteps filled the terminal, and occasional laughter from families embarking on new adventures added to the atmosphere. Among the sea of passengers, Zara Bennett stood out, not because she sought attention, but because of the quiet confidence she carried. She clutched her first-class boarding pass, standing with a composed demeanor. Zara was a polite and reserved teenager, her excitement tempered by natural shyness. Today was a big day for her. This flight was more than just a journey. It was a celebration of her achievements. She had just completed her studies after winning a prestigious scholarship to study in the States. Dressed in a sleek, effortlessly stylish outfit, Zara walked through the exclusive first-class lounge, her boarding pass in hand. The lounge, with its plush leather chairs, ambient lighting, and soft jazz music playing in the background, was a sanctuary of comfort and privilege. Around her, travelers sipped complimentary lattes, read newspapers, and tapped away on laptops. Zara settled into one of the cozy armchairs, placing her phone and coffee on the table in front of her. She glanced at her boarding pass for what felt like the 100th time, not out of doubt but anticipation. The first-class seat wasn't a luxury she flaunted, but it was one she had every right to enjoy. As Zara scrolled through her phone, a message from her father popped up. "About to board. Let me know when you're settled." Zara quickly replied, "Almost there. I'll text once I'm on the plane. Everything's fine." Her father, Victor Bennett, wasn't just a proud dad. He was the owner of the very airline she was about to fly on. But his humble nature meant he rarely flaunted his status. Zara had grown up watching him treat everyone, from the cleaning crew to board executives, with the same level of respect. She had always admired his humility, despite his immense success. Few people knew Zara was his daughter. Victor preferred to keep family matters private, and Zara liked it that way. She glanced out at the tarmac, her thoughts drifting. She hadn't been home in over 2 years, having lived in another state for school. While she cherished her independence, being away from her family, especially her father, hadn't been easy. This trip felt different. It wasn't just a flight. It was a return to the life she had been missing. She was excited for the reunion with her father, the special dinner organized to welcome her home, and the chance to reflect on how far they had come as a family. But what Zara didn't know was that this flight would challenge her in ways she never expected. And what Claudia, the flight attendant, didn't know was how much trouble her prejudice was about to cause her. Welcome to America's Hidden Stories, where the truth is always revealed. As Zara scrolled through her phone, she noticed a pair of flight attendants standing near the service counter. One of them, a woman with sharp features and a tightly wound bun, glanced in Zara's direction. Claudia Harper, the lead flight attendant, exchanged a smirk with her colleague. "First class is getting too accessible," Claudia muttered under her breath. Her tone carried an air of superiority, as if certain passengers didn't deserve to share the space. Her colleague chuckled nervously but didn't respond. The boarding announcement echoed through the terminal. Zara stood, adjusted her carry-on, and made her way toward the gate, joining the first-class line. Claudia, now stationed at the entrance of the plane, scanned each passenger's boarding pass with a practiced smile. "Welcome aboard," she said warmly to an older white man in a tailored suit. To another woman holding a designer purse, she chirped, "Enjoy your flight." But when Zara reached the front of the line, Claudia's demeanor shifted ever so slightly. She scanned Zara's pass, her eyes narrowing briefly. The ticket clearly read first class, but instead of directing Zara to her rightful seat, Claudia plastered on a tight smile. "Oh, economy is just down the aisle," she said, pointing toward the back of the plane. Zara blinked, surprised. "This pass says first class," she replied, holding it up for Claudia to see. Claudia didn't falter. "There must have been a mistake. Please head to economy." Her tone was polite on the surface, but carried an undeniable edge of dismissal. Zara's grip tightened on her carry-on, but her voice remained calm. "There's no mistake. This is my seat in first class." Passengers behind Zara began shifting impatiently, the tension at the gate growing. Claudia leaned in closer, her voice dropping slightly. "Look, I don't want you to cause a scene. Just head to economy so we can keep things moving." Have you ever been treated unfairly just because someone thought you didn't belong? What would you do in Zara's situation? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and if you love this story, click the subscribe button now. Refusing to back down, Zara stepped onto the plane, her posture unwavering. Claudia's eyes followed her, a flicker of annoyance crossing her face. Zara walked to her assigned seat in first class and placed her carry-on in the overhead bin. The cabin was immaculate, with spacious seats and a calming ambiance. She settled into her seat, adjusting the window shade slightly. Moments later, Claudia entered the cabin. A seasoned professional, she was known for her no-nonsense demeanor and sharp eye for detail. Her heels clicked sharply against the floor as she approached Zara's row, her face set in a mask of professional politeness. She glanced at Zara, her expression unreadable, and raised a hand to stop her. "Excuse me, young lady," Claudia said, her tone firm but polite. "First class is reserved for paying passengers." Zara blinked, momentarily stunned. She looked down at her boarding pass, then back at Claudia. "I am a first-class passenger," she replied, her voice steady but soft. "Here's my ticket." She extended the pass to Claudia, expecting the matter to be resolved quickly. But Claudia didn't take the ticket. Instead, she crossed her arms and gave Zara a skeptical look. "I don't think so," Claudia said dismissively. "Step aside while I handle this." The words hit Zara like a slap. She stood frozen for a moment, unsure of how to respond. Around her, murmurs began. Passengers in the economy line were starting to notice the interaction. Some exchanged pitying glances, while others whispered judgments. Zara could feel their eyes on her, each glance a reminder of the humiliation she was enduring. Claudia didn't stop there. She took a step forward, her voice growing sharper. "Let me see your ticket again. Are you sure you didn't accidentally take someone else's pass?" Zara held out the ticket once more, her hands trembling slightly. "It's mine," she said quietly. "This is my ticket." Claudia raised an eyebrow, her tone laced with doubt. "Your father bought it for you? And where is he now?" "He's waiting for me at our destination," Zara answered. Claudia let out a small scoff, glancing around as if searching for validation for her disbelief. She hesitated, her eyes flicking between the ticket and Zara. "I'm going to need to verify this," she said. Little did Claudia know, the truth was about to unravel. "Wait here," Claudia said curtly. Zara sat motionless, the knot of humiliation tightening in her chest. Around her, passengers whispered. Some looked at her with pity, while others wore judgmental expressions. No one stepped forward to help or even question what was happening. She felt the sting of isolation, but her father's words echoed in her mind. Always carry yourself with dignity, even when others don't. Still, it was hard not to let the emotions overwhelm her. Tears pricked at the corners of her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. Taking a deep breath, she reminded herself who she was. Zara Bennett, daughter of a man who built an empire from the ground up. A man who had taught her that respect was something no one could take from her. As Claudia walked away, Zara stood alone, her cheeks burning with embarrassment. Passengers continued to glance her way, their murmurs growing louder. Minutes later, Claudia returned. This time, her voice was louder than necessary. "Excuse me, I need to ask you to move to the economy section. This seat has been assigned to someone else, someone who belongs in this cabin." Several passengers turned their heads at the commotion. Zara, still calm, reached for her boarding pass again and held it up. "But this is my seat. How can it be assigned to someone else?" she asked firmly. Claudia crossed her arms, her polite mask slipping. "If you don't comply, I'll have to escalate this and call security." The tension in the cabin was palpable. Zara met Claudia's gaze with quiet determination. The standoff had only just begun. Whispers spread like wildfire among the passengers. A businessman leaned toward his companion, muttering, "Looks like someone's trying their luck." Across the aisle, an older woman frowned, her expression disapproving. "This doesn't seem right," she murmured under her breath. But not everyone was on Zara's side. A man seated a few rows back scoffed, "Well, if she doesn't belong here, the attendant has every right to question her." Claudia, determined to assert her authority and unwilling to back down, took the ultimate step. She called security. Minutes later, 2 officers boarded the plane, their presence adding a new layer of tension to the unfolding drama. They approached Zara's seat, their expressions professional but firm. Zara, still composed, calmly explained the situation and showed her boarding pass. Her voice was steady as she defended her right to sit where she belonged. But Claudia's narrative prevailed. The officers, deferring to her authority, turned to Zara. "Ma'am," one of them said, his voice low but authoritative, "we've been asked to escort you to another seat." Zara met their gaze, her voice unwavering. "This is my assigned seat," she said, holding up her boarding pass. "I have every right to be here." The officers hesitated, glancing at Claudia for confirmation. She nodded sharply, her expression one of vindication. "Her seat is in economy," she said firmly. Despite Zara's protests and the validity of her ticket, the officers deferred to Claudia. They escorted Zara to the economy section, the whispers and stares of passengers following her down the aisle. Her composure never faltered, but the humiliation was undeniable. Back in first class, Claudia walked through the cabin with an air of triumph, a satisfied smile tugging at her lips. "That's how you handled troublemakers," she muttered to a fellow flight attendant. Then, glancing around at the passengers, she added smugly, "First class is for people who belong here." Humiliated but composed, Zara took her new seat in economy. Passengers craned their necks to watch, some indifferent, others sympathetic, a few smugly satisfied. Claudia, reveling in her victory, strode through first class with a self-satisfied smirk. "That girl didn't even look like she belonged here," she said loudly. "Yet she tried to claim it." Her tone dripped with self-satisfaction. Was Claudia right to judge Zara because of her skin color? Let us know in the comments. And if you believe in justice for all, hit that subscribe button for more stories like this. As the flight continued, the quiet hum of the cabin contrasted sharply with the tension lingering in the air. Zara sat upright in her economy seat, her expression composed. Outwardly, she appeared calm, but inside, frustration gnawed at her. She glanced down at her phone. The unsent text to her father still lingered on the screen. "This isn't right, Dad. Why didn't they believe me?" Her finger hovered over the send button, but she hesitated. She knew her father would act immediately, and likely, not subtly. Zara stayed calm, but it wasn't easy. She could feel the weight of Claudia's judgment with every skeptical glance, every dismissive remark. It wasn't just the embarrassment of being questioned. It was the underlying message: you don't belong. You're not enough. But Zara wasn't about to let those feelings consume her. She took a deep breath, steadying herself even as the murmurs from other passengers grew louder, even as the stares became harder to ignore. She held her head high. Inside, the sting of humiliation burned, but she wouldn't let it show. Meanwhile, in first class, a fellow flight attendant turned to Claudia, lowering her voice. "Why did you move that girl? She had a first-class ticket." Claudia smirked, her tone smug. She thought she could just walk in and claim whatever she wanted. She made sure her voice was loud enough for nearby passengers to overhear. "It takes experience to see through that kind of nonsense, and I had to put her where she rightly belongs." A few passengers chuckled politely, but others exchanged uneasy glances, sensing that her comments were anything but professional. Back in economy, Zara sat still, her composure intact despite the humiliation she had just endured. The first-class ticket, the validation of her rightful place, now felt like a cruel joke. She pulled out her phone, her fingers trembling slightly as she typed, "Dad, they moved me to economy. The flight attendant claimed my seat was a mistake." Her father, Victor Bennett, replied almost instantly, "Stay calm, I'll handle it. Let me know if anything else happens." Zara stared at the screen for a moment. Her father's unwavering support gave her strength. Taking a deep breath, she slipped her phone back into her bag. For now, she would wait, trusting that her father's intervention would come at the right time. A little later, Zara stood up to stretch her legs, making her way toward the bathroom at the back of the plane. As she waited, a soft voice spoke behind her. "I saw what happened earlier." She turned to see an older woman from first class, her kind eyes filled with concern. Her tone carried a mix of empathy and quiet indignation. "That wasn't right," the woman continued softly. "You didn't deserve to be treated like that. If there's anything I can do to help, just let me know." For a moment, Zara was caught off guard by the woman's kindness. She managed a small smile. "Thank you," she said. "I appreciate it, but I'll be okay." The woman nodded, placing a gentle hand on Zara's arm. "You're handling this with such grace, more than most people would manage." She gave Zara an encouraging smile before returning to her seat. Back in first class, Claudia Harper was still basking in her perceived victory. She leaned against the galley, speaking loudly enough for others to hear. Her colleagues exchanged uncertain glances, the unease in their expressions growing as they listened. Some who overheard her boasting whispered among themselves. A few shook their heads in silent disapproval. But no one spoke up directly. Claudia remained oblivious, her confidence swelling as she continued. "Honestly, I'm doing them a favor. It's about maintaining standards. If we let anyone in, it's chaos." Meanwhile, in economy, Zara sat in the cramped seat, her hands resting lightly on her lap, her breathing steady. But inside, frustration simmered beneath the surface. She stared out of the small window at the endless expanse of clouds, trying to distract herself from the gnawing sense of unfairness that had followed her since boarding. After a few moments, she decided to do something simple, something to shift her focus, even for a little while. She reached up and pressed the small call button above her seat. The soft chime barely rose above the hum of the plane. She leaned back slightly, waiting patiently for someone to approach. Several minutes passed. Zara watched as flight attendants moved up and down the aisle, tending to passengers with quiet efficiency. But none of them came to her row. Finally, she spotted Claudia Harper making her way toward her section. Claudia's expression was unreadable, her polished exterior still intact, but there was an unmistakable edge to her movements. She stopped abruptly by Zara's row, her voice sharp and devoid of warmth. "Yes?" Zara looked up at her, meeting her gaze with quiet politeness. "Could I have a glass of water, please?" she asked, her tone measured and calm. Claudia's response was immediate, but curt. She offered a thin smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Sure," she said, her voice clipped. Then, without another word, she turned on her heel and walked away. Zara watched her retreating figure, her expression calm but questioning. She glanced at her watch. A few minutes passed, then 10. Still, no water arrived. Zara's eyes followed Claudia as she moved through the first-class cabin. She watched as the flight attendant carefully served drinks to other passengers, offering them her practiced smile and engaging in light conversation. Claudia's gestures seemed almost exaggerated, as if she wanted to make a show of her efficiency and attentiveness. But all the while she avoided Zara's section entirely. The deliberate nature of it wasn't lost on Zara. She pressed the call button again. Her patience was beginning to wear thin. What would you do in Zara's situation? Let us know in the comments below. And if you believe in justice, hit that subscribe button for more stories like this. The call that changed everything. The soft chime of the call button felt louder this time, almost mocking. It underscored Zara's growing frustration, each second stretching unbearably. Claudia finally returned to the economy section, her movements slower, almost reluctant. She stopped by Zara's row, her expression now tinged with something resembling annoyance. "Yes?" she asked again, her tone sharp enough to make a few nearby passengers glance up. Zara kept her voice calm, though it required effort. "I requested water earlier," she said evenly. "Can I get it now?" For a moment, Claudia said nothing. Then her tight-lipped smile returned, a deliberate, insincere gesture. "I'll get to it," she said, her voice dripping with indifference. Before Zara could respond, Claudia turned and disappeared back into first class. Zara's calm facade began to crack. The deliberate hostility was unmistakable now. She felt the sting of humiliation settle deeper in her chest. Glancing around, she wondered, did anyone else notice what was happening? Were they ignoring it? Or was she truly alone in this? Her eyes dropped to her phone. The screen still glowed with her father's earlier message. "Stay calm. I'll handle it. Let me know if anything else happens." Her fingers moved with quiet urgency as she typed, "Dad, the flight attendant is targeting me. She's deliberately ignoring my requests and making me feel unwelcome. It's becoming unbearable." Zara stared at the words for a moment before pressing send. The finality of it brought both relief and frustration. Her father's reply came almost immediately, as it always did. "Stay where you are. I'm making the call now." Short, director, full of weight. Zara exhaled slowly. She knew her father wasn't one to let things slide. If he said he was making a call, he meant business. Now all she could do was wait. A voice in the crowd. As the minutes passed, Zara felt the weight of the situation pressing down on her. Had anyone else noticed how she was being treated? A few passengers had cast sympathetic glances her way, but no one spoke up. Their silence felt almost as isolating as Claudia's actions. Then, a quiet movement caught her attention. A young girl, seated a few rows away in economy, approached her. Her expression was kind but determined. She leaned in slightly, her voice soft yet firm. "That flight attendant is always wicked to any black person she sees," the girl whispered. "She acts like we don't belong, like we can't afford first class." Her tone carried an air of quiet outrage. "That kind of behavior shouldn't be tolerated. I hope she gets karma soon for what she's done to you." Zara blinked, her composure faltering slightly in the face of the girl's sincerity. A lump formed in her throat. "She definitely will," Zara replied softly. "Today?" The girl smiled, her presence leaving Zara with a flicker of warmth amid the tension. As she walked away, Zara turned her focus back to the situation at hand. Her father had made a call. Now, all she could do was wait. The call that changed everything. Midway through the flight, as the plane cruised above the clouds, the secure line in the cockpit rang. The captain, a seasoned professional with years of experience, picked up the receiver. His expression was neutral at first, his eyes scanning the instruments out of habit. But as the voice on the other end spoke, his demeanor shifted. His brows furrowed, his posture straightened. The voice belonged to Victor Bennett, the owner of the airline. Despite the calm and measured tone, there was no mistaking the authority behind his words. Victor's instructions were clear, deliberate, leaving no room for interpretation. "Yes, sir," the captain responded, his voice steady but carrying a new weight of urgency. "Understood." The conversation lasted no more than a minute, but its impact would linger long after the call ended. As the captain placed the receiver back in its cradle, he exhaled slowly. He knew that when someone like Victor Bennett made a mid-flight call, it wasn't a casual inquiry. It was a direct intervention. Without hesitation, the captain activated the intercom. "Miss Harper, report to the cockpit immediately." The moment of reckoning. In first class, Claudia Harper was in the middle of a boastful conversation with a colleague when she felt a tap on her shoulder. Startled, she turned, only to find the captain standing behind her. His face was composed, but his serious expression immediately caught her attention. Claudia's initial annoyance at being interrupted quickly gave way to apprehension. "Miss Harper," the captain said, his tone firm but controlled. "I need to speak with you, now." Claudia straightened her posture, forcing a polite smile. "Of course," she said, keeping her voice crisp. "What's the matter?" The captain wasted no time. "I've just received a call from Mr. Victor Bennett." He paused, letting the weight of the name sink in. Claudia's brow furrowed. For the first time, her confidence wavered. "Victor Bennett?" she repeated, her voice barely above a whisper. The captain nodded. "Yes," he confirmed, his tone steady. "The owner of the airline." At the mention of Zara, the color drained from Claudia's face. "What do you think happens next? Drop your thoughts in the comments below." The fall of Claudia Harper. The pieces began to fall into place. Then, realization hit her like a cold wave. Her carefully constructed narrative, that she was merely handling troublemakers, suddenly felt flimsy, inadequate. The captain continued, his voice carrying an air of finality. "Mr. Bennett has instructed me to inform you that he will be meeting the plane personally upon landing. He expects an explanation. And from now on, he expects you to take care of her well, treat her in the best way you can." For a moment, Claudia stood frozen. Her mind raced. The color drained from her face as the weight of the situation fully settled on her. I didn't realize," she stammered, her usual sharpness replaced by hesitation. The captain's expression didn't change. "That's irrelevant." His tone was cold. "What matters is how this situation was handled." Claudia's bravado cracked, her hands clenched at her sides, but there was no saving this. The authority in the captain's voice left no room for excuses. She nodded stiffly, her throat dry as she managed a weak, "Understood." As the captain turned and walked back to the cockpit, Claudia remained rooted in place. The confidence she had so proudly displayed throughout the flight was now a distant memory. She muttered under her breath, almost as if trying to reassure herself. "I'm sure it's nothing." But even she didn't believe it. Her words lacked conviction. The unease gnawed at her, growing stronger with each passing minute. The shift in the cabin. For the rest of the flight, Claudia's demeanor was noticeably subdued. Her steps, once brisk and purposeful, were now hesitant. The smug remarks that had flowed so freely earlier, gone, replaced by tense silence. Passengers who had witnessed her earlier behavior noticed the change. Whispers rippled through the cabin. Some murmured in curiosity, others in quiet satisfaction. Claudia, however, avoided meeting anyone's gaze. Her mind was consumed by one thought: the confrontation waiting for her upon landing. What would happen? The price of arrogance Claudia tried to push through. She forced herself to carry on with her duties. She picked up a tray to offer refreshments. Her hands trembled. Approaching a passenger in first class, she forced a smile and spoke, but her voice faltered. "Would you like a drink?" The passenger frowned, confused by her sudden change in tone, but they accepted the drink without comment. Her colleagues, who were so used to her assertiveness, exchanged curious glances. Claudia's sharpness was gone, replaced by visible unease. Her hands fumbled as she collected empty glasses. She avoided making eye contact. The whispers grew. The crew noticed. The passengers noticed. And Claudia knew her time was running out. What happens next? Will Claudia face the consequences of her actions when the plane lands? Will Victor Bennett ensure justice is served? Comment your thoughts below. And if you want more powerful stories like this, don't forget to subscribe. Claudia's breaking point. Nearby, whispers began to stir. "What's wrong with her?" one colleague murmured to another. "She looks like she's seen a ghost." But Claudia's distraction wasn't just internal, it began to seep into her work. She misread passenger requests, served drinks to the wrong rows, forgot orders she had just taken. Passengers noticed her repeated trips to the galley, where she lingered longer than necessary, gripping the counter as if trying to steady herself. The confidence she once exuded? Gone. The final attempt. Finally, Claudia reached a breaking point. She glanced toward economy, toward Zara. There she sat, composed, untouched by the chaos Claudia was unraveling in. Her expression was calm, her fingers scrolling through her phone, a faint, knowing smile on her lips. Claudia's stomach tightened. The thought of Victor Bennett boarding the plane and addressing her directly was too much. She needed to make this right. Somehow. Swallowing her pride, Claudia grabbed a tray and made her way toward Zara's seat. Each step felt like a trial. She stopped beside Zara's row and cleared her throat. "Miss Bennett," she began, her voice uncharacteristically soft. "Can I get you anything? A drink? A snack? Perhaps a hot towel?" Zara looked up. Her expression was neutral, but her eyes were sharp. "No, thank you," she said politely. Her tone was calm, distant. Claudia hesitated. The forced smile on her face faltered. "Are you sure? Anything at all? Please just let me know." Zara shook her head. "I'm fine." The rejection stung, but Claudia wasn't ready to give up. Desperation in the air. Over the next hour, Claudia made repeated trips to Zara's row, offering everything she could think of. Extra blankets, premium snacks, a meal upgrade. Each time Zara declined, unfailingly polite, yet firm. Passengers began watching. Whispers filled the cabin. "She's never this attentive," someone murmured. "Something must have happened," another whispered, shaking their head. "She's practically falling over herself." Zara, however, was not surprised. She knew this wasn't remorse. This was fear. And each time Claudia approached, Zara met her with the same composed smile, a silent reminder that her attempts to undo the damage were futile. A plea for forgiveness. Eventually, Claudia abandoned the tray altogether. She approached Zara empty-handed, her expression strained. The air of authority she once carried? Gone. Now there was only desperation. She crouched slightly, lowering herself to Zara's eye level. Her voice trembled. "Miss Bennett, I just wanted to say, I'm sorry. For earlier. It was a misunderstanding on my part. I didn't realize—" She trailed off, unsure how to finish the sentence without incriminating herself further. I hope we can just put this behind us." Zara studied her. Her calm demeanor never wavered. Then, with measured words, she replied, "The matter is no longer in my hands." Claudia blinked, confused. "What do you mean?" Zara's tone remained steady, firm. "My father is handling it now. He's the one who will decide whether or not you're forgiven." Claudia's face fell. Her composure shattered. She opened her mouth to respond, but no words came. The weight of Zara's statement hung in the air. There was no room for negotiation. For the first time, Claudia understood. Her actions had consequences. And now? She had no control over them. Zara turned her attention back to her phone. A silent signal. The conversation was over. Claudia stood there for a moment longer, her thoughts racing. Then, defeated, she turned and retreated to the galley. Passengers who had been watching the exchange in rapt attention leaned toward one another. The whispers grew. The fall of Claudia Harper had begun. What happens next? Will Claudia face the consequences when they land? What will Victor Bennett do? The reckoning. As the plane touched down smoothly on the runway, passengers gathered their belongings, preparing to disembark. But outside, an unusual scene unfolded. Through the windows, a sleek black SUV pulled up directly beside the aircraft, its polished surface gleaming under the airport lights. The door swung open, and out stepped Victor Bennett. His presence alone was commanding, but flanking him were two senior executives, making it clear this was no ordinary visit. All eyes on Victor inside the plane, whispers erupted immediately. "Who's that?" one passenger asked, nudging their seatmate. "He looks important." "That's Victor Bennett," another murmured, eyes widening. "He owns the airline." "What's he doing here?" Victor ascended the stairs with a purposeful stride. As he entered the cabin, the atmosphere shifted. Conversations hushed. All eyes turned to him. His gaze swept the rows, searching, until he found her. Zara, sitting in economy. His expression softened. He walked straight to her, his face briefly losing its edge of authority, replaced by something gentler. When he reached her row, he crouched slightly to meet her eye level. His voice, warm yet concerned, broke the silence. "Are you all right?" Zara looked up, her composed exterior betraying a flicker of relief. "I'm okay," she replied, though her tone carried traces of lingering frustration. "It's just been a lot." Victor placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "It's over now," he said softly. "You won't have to deal with this any longer." Then he straightened, and just like that, the warmth in his expression vanished. The confrontation Victor's calm but firm authority settled over the cabin. His gaze shifted, from Zara to Claudia Harper. Claudia stood frozen at the front of the cabin. Her face was pale, her usual sharpness completely absent. The realization that Victor Bennett had come for her was written all over her features. "Miss Harper," Victor began, his voice steady, measured. "I understand there was an issue with my daughter's seat." Claudia's composure crumbled entirely. Her lips parted as if to speak, but for a moment no sound came out. Finally, she stammered, I didn't know she was your daughter, sir. It was a misunderstanding." Victor's gaze remained unflinching. His tone didn't rise, but the weight of his words was unmistakable. The issue isn't whether you knew she was my daughter. The issue is how you treated her. His voice was calm, but cutting. And likely, how you treat others who don't meet your assumptions. Claudia's face reddened. She tried to respond, but her words tumbled out incoherently. I didn't mean to. I didn't realize. Victor raised a hand slightly, a silent command to stop talking. Your behavior today has been nothing short of unacceptable. And now he wasn't just addressing Claudia. He was speaking to everyone. This airline was built on the principles of respect and dignity. Our success has come from treating every passenger, regardless of who they are or where they come from, with fairness and professionalism. Your actions today have failed those values. For a moment the cabin was silent. Then applause. A wave of approval spread through the plane. Passengers clapped enthusiastically. Some nodded in agreement. Others exchanged glances, satisfied that Claudia's actions were being addressed. But Claudia? She looked mortified. Her head hung low. Her hands trembled as she clutched the edge of the service cart for balance. The applause felt like an indictment. Each clap amplified her humiliation. She opened her mouth to apologize again, but Victor didn't give her the chance. Effective immediately, he said, turning to the executives beside him. Miss Harper is to be removed from duty. Her behavior today does not align with the standards of this airline, and she will be held accountable. One of the executives nodded, then gestured toward Claudia. Miss Harper, please come with us. The end of Claudia Harper. Claudia looked around, her face a mix of shame and desperation. She glanced briefly at Zara, and for a moment, their eyes met. Zara's expression was calm, composed. There was no malice, but there was also no forgiveness, only a quiet certainty that justice was being served. As Claudia was escorted off the plane, passengers whispered among themselves. She had it coming, one muttered. You can't treat people like that and get away with it. A father's promise. Back in her seat, Zara watched the scene unfold. Relief settled over her. Not triumph, just a quiet vindication. Victor returned to her side, his presence a steadying force. Are you sure you're okay? He asked again, his voice gentle. Zara nodded. I'm fine now, she said, her tone stronger than before. Thank you, Dad. Victor gave her a small smile. You never have to thank me for standing up for you, he said. It's what I'm here for. As the plane began to empty, Zara stood with her father. Passengers murmured as they passed. Many cast Zara looks of admiration, respect, and as she stepped off the plane, she knew this was only the beginning. Victor Bennett, deeply committed to upholding the values on which his airline was built, ordered an immediate review of staff training programs. This wasn't just damage control. It was a fundamental shift. Victor personally worked with his leadership team to implement mandatory workshops on diversity, inclusion, and respect, ensuring that no passenger, regardless of their background, would ever face what Zara endured. But this training wasn't superficial. It was thorough, challenging, uncomfortable. Employees were pushed to confront their biases and reflect on how their actions impact others. Role-playing exercises forced them to step into the shoes of passengers from all walks of life. Guest speakers shared real-world stories of discrimination and its lasting harm. Staff were reminded that their job was not just about service, but about dignity and respect. The message was clear. This airline would set the standard for fairness. Claudia Harper's reckoning. Meanwhile, Claudia Harper had been dismissed from her position. For weeks, she stayed away from the airline, consumed by shame and regret. At first, she felt a mix of embarrassment and anger. I was humiliated. But as time passed, those feelings changed, For the first time, she began to question herself. She realized her behavior hadn't just been unprofessional, it had been unfair. And worst of all, she had never questioned her own assumptions until now. The apology one evening, as Claudia sat at her kitchen table, she opened her laptop. Her fingers hovered over the keys. Then she began to type. The email she sent to the airline was long, heartfelt, every word carefully chosen. She didn't just apologize for what she had done to Zara. She apologized for the mindset that allowed it to seem acceptable. She admitted she had failed, not just as an employee, but as a human being. "I can't undo the harm I caused," she wrote, "but I am committed to learning from this and ensuring it never happens again. If given the chance, I would like to prove that I've changed." A second chance. When Victor Bennett read the email, he saw something he hadn't expected. Sincerity. After discussing it with his team, they made a decision. Claudia would be given a second chance, but under strict probationary terms. Her actions would be monitored. Any sign of unprofessionalism or prejudice, immediate dismissal. No warnings, no exceptions. Claudia accepted. But this time, she wasn't just looking to keep her job. She wanted to make things right. A true transformation. Back at the airline, Claudia immersed herself in the training. She volunteered for every workshop. She spoke openly about her past mistakes, using her own experience as a lesson. She listened, really listened, to the stories of those she once dismissed. Over time, her colleagues noticed. She wasn't the same Claudia Harper who judged passengers on assumptions. She had become someone who went out of her way to ensure every passenger felt valued. Redemption wasn't easy, but she had earned it. Victor's message to the world weeks later, Victor Bennett stood before a room full of reporters. At a press conference addressing the incident, he spoke with a calm but resolute tone. "Inclusion is not optional, it's a responsibility." His voice was steady. Privilege comes with responsibility, whether it's the privilege of serving as a flight attendant or the privilege of leading an airline. What happened on that flight should never have happened, and under my watch, it will never happen again. A new standard. The incident with Zara had been painful, but it became a turning point. The airline set new standards for fairness and respect. Claudia found redemption through action. And Zara? She walked away knowing that sometimes justice isn't about revenge, it's about change. Sitting in first class, Victor Bennett's voice carried a message that resonated beyond the walls of the press conference. We all have a duty to treat each other with respect and dignity. No one should ever feel unwelcome or unworthy because of their appearance or background. His words struck a chord. The story went viral, sparking worldwide conversations on social media. Hashtags like #Moitsak Inclusion Matters and Respect for All trended for days. Thousands shared their own experiences with discrimination, using Zara's story as a catalyst for change. While many praised Victor's leadership, others reflected on their own biases and how they could do better. One moment, one decision, one flight. And now, the impact was global. Zara's transformation. For Zara, the experience had been a turning point. She had endured humiliation. She had faced unfairness, but she had also stood her ground. Through it all, she learned, checkmark strength is found in standing up for yourself. Resilience grows from adversity. Dignity and respect are not privileges, they are rights. And most importantly, she had seen firsthand that change was possible. The new airline training programs, the viral discussions online, even Claudia's transformation. They were all proof that one voice can make a difference. What started as one moment of injustice had become a movement. A new flight, a new perspective. Weeks later, Zara and Victor found themselves on another flight, seated side by side in first class. Zara glanced around. She watched the crew at work. Their movements were effortless and professional. Their smiles were genuine. Their service was warm and respectful, no hesitation, no judgment, just dignity and professionalism, the way it should have always been. One of the flight attendants approached, offering her a drink with a kind smile. Zara returned the gesture. Then she looked over at her father. They didn't need to say anything. They both felt it. This flight was different. This time the change was real. She leaned back in her seat, a quiet sense of satisfaction washing over her. Change isn't easy, but it's always worth fighting for. What do you think? If you believe in standing up for fairness, equality, and respect for everyone, hit that like button. Share your thoughts in the comments. Did Claudia deserve a second chance? Have you ever faced or witnessed a moment of injustice? What would you have done in Zara's place? Let's keep the conversation going. And don't forget to subscribe for more inspiring stories like this. See you in the next one.